Welcome, everybody, to the next in our webinar series, Supporting International Students with Disabilities. The topic of today's webinar is pretty much as it's named. We will start by introducing our presenters, going over some ground rules. Then we'll kind of look at an overview of what we're going to cover, and then we'll go through the presentation. The presentation is going to be a mix of slides, and we'll also be bringing the audience into the discussion. We have about 3 case studies that are going to be interspersed throughout the presentation. So we hope that you are ready to be sharing your ideas with us as we share our ideas with you. And through that process, hopefully we're all going to go away a little bit smarter than we started today. This presentation has captions. You can access the captions either through your Zoom interface, and there should be an option for captions. And we also have a link that should go out in the chat that if you click that, it will open up a browser window and allow you to view captions that way. For participating in this discussion, in any discussions, we're going to have 3 case studies. You can feel free to send your responses in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and share that way. So let's go ahead and go on to the slide 2, and we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. So my name is Justin Harford, and I'm a program specialist with the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. NCDE is a Department of State sponsored program that's implemented by Mobility International USA, which is my employer, and also my associate Ashley, who's helping us with some of the background technical stuff. And our goal is to provide accessibility consulting services to the field of international education, including international student support services. And I'll pass it on to, let's go to Kristen.
Hi, my name is Kristen Mossman. I am a Assistant Director of Operations at the Disability Center through the University of Missouri, Columbia. So that's in Columbia, Missouri. I work as Assistant Director of Operations. I also oversee students with accommodations through the School of Law, housing accommodations at the university, as well as students who study abroad. As included is being a liaison to our International Center office to be that support person for any questions that might come in regarding accommodations or accessibility on campus. To give a little bit of information about the university and our international student population, we have for the spring semester about 1,200 students who are international students. So just a small population, but I will pass it on to Sheriff.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sharif Rashid. I am currently the Director of the Office of Disability at the Community College of Aurora in Colorado. My interest in this presentation, I was an international student myself. I'm originally from Nigeria. I came to the US in 2012 to pursue my master's degree in special education. And when I finished, my master's degree, I got a job in Michigan, Wisconsin. Now I'm in Colorado. I think, with little experience I've had, working with international students, I could relate with, what their experiences are because I used to be an international student myself. I welcome you all to this webinar, and I hope you will learn something from us today.
Thanks, Sheriff and Kristen, and not to put Sheriff too much on the spot, but I feel like, I think your story is a great example of why we're all here, right? And I mean, I think this is studying in the United States. It's not for everyone, but for many students from other countries, it can be an amazing opportunity that can lead to uh, all sorts of stuff after. So just like for students like Shurif. I mean, we encounter a lot of students that come from other countries and they find opportunities that they might not have had access to if they had gone elsewhere. So that's why we're all here. And going on to slide 3, this is just kind of showing an overview of what we're going to be covering today. So the goal is we're going to talk about how to identify and recruit international students, increasing some of those help-seeking behaviors, and kind of identifying, because sometimes students are coming to the United States themselves, maybe not even knowing that they qualify for disability services. Then we'll talk about some of the unique challenges and characteristics of international students. We'll talk about available resources and solutions, as well as collaboration and advocacy. And we will have case studies interspersed throughout that discussion. And on to outreach.
Awesome. Okay. So I am going to talk a little bit about identifying students in that outreach area. So it's very similar to connecting with students who are first generation students or students from the United States on getting them to self-identify with the Office of Disability Services. But we have realized that some institutions, this is kind of an area that gets looked over when providing that information. So some things that I would suggest, or some things that we have done that we have found to be helpful here at the university, is sharing all of our printed materials and digital materials with the International Center for academic accommodations, housing accommodations, so that they can receive that information as they are coming into school, as they are thinking about Mizzou, and having the international staff having that on hand for any student that comes into their office. Another thing that we have found to be helpful, or I have found to be helpful, is presenting at the international student orientations every semester. So over the last 2 semesters, I have been attending, our international office does a international orientation lunch. That's a very relaxed, casual conversation, but they invite resources from campus to have that lunch with them. And during that lunch, I'm able to talk to students about what I do, how I interact with students, why I'm there, and why that might be of interest to them or to somebody that they might know. And we just talk, and it's very casual. And I think that's been a great opportunity. I've been able to show my face in their office and get students to be able to recognize where our office is and that we're here to support them. Another thing is ensuring that international student materials are also digitally accessible. So here at the University of Missouri, our International Center has their own marketing and communications team. So I don't work directly with that information. They make sure everything is digitally accessible through their office, but a good thing to start with is figuring out who is in charge of accessibility or checking for accessibility on those digital materials. If that's not your marketing and communications team, who is it? And so making sure that that's accessible for students is a great thing to start with. I think a lot of us are working on digital accessibility as new laws come out, so this is a great way to continue that work. The final thing on this slide is going to be training international student support services advisors to listen for keywords. We do this the same way we do it with our academic advisors through the different colleges. We are working with those advisors to listen for keywords to make sure students are getting the resources that they need when they come here. So I work with the advisors on listening for handicap or special needs. Those are words that are used around the world. Now here we might use more of the accessible or disabled, but universally most people are going to understand what you mean by handicap. Another word that people use is modifications, whereas here in the United States, we use accommodations. Modifications might be something that they utilize. And finally, workplace accommodations, modifications, same thing as above, just working on what are they using as their phrases and making sure that the International Student Support Services advisors are able to at least catch those to get them to the right services. Sure.
Thank you, Christine. Now we will be talking about misconceptions about students with disability, especially international students. Like we know, international students, majority of them come from different countries. There are a lot of these misconceptions. I wouldn't say they are universal. There are some of them that are specific to one area or the other. One of the misconceptions we do hear a lot from international students is, I don't need support, or there's no support available for me. Because, coming from, different country, being the United States, a lot of international students with disability don't know what disabilities are covered by accommodation. Some people think, only people who are physically disabled are, accommodated. A lot of them don't think about, anxiety, depression as something to be accommodated, and, they might not seek support. Also, other medical conditions, say, diabetes or anything, a lot of them might not even count themselves as someone who is disabled, even though they might be struggling, and even though they might, need support. That's why it's very important for us to outreach. And when we do outreach to international students, if we can make mention of, the types of disabilities that we do provide accommodations for, each time I meet with, students, whether they are international or not, I, usually tell them these are the, we cover anxiety, depression, ADHD, all sorts of things, because, a lot of, students might not even know that they can get accommodation. Another thing, like I just mentioned, is disability is only physical or sensory. People, especially around the world, even me, myself, I have a physical disability myself. I had polio when I was 2. Not until when I got here that I know, disability is not just about physical disability. Anxiety is part of, disability, even cancer or HIV, things, that could be debilitating to your health. You can receive services. That's why, but in other countries, people just look at it, whether you are blind. If you are blind, yes, you have a disability. If you have physical, you use wheelchair, you have a disability. Other than that, or you are deaf, those are the 3 major things people look out for in a lot of countries as disability. And, the other bullet points I'm going to talk about is assistance reduces, academic rigor. A lot of people think if I do seek accommodation, I may, that might be noted on my transcript. That might prevent them or, discourage them from seeking accommodation support, because in other countries, once you are labeled a disabled, because disability in a lot of countries is like a stigma, this is not something people want to associate themselves with. I've worked with a lot of students, a lot of international students have shared with me, is it going to appear on my transcript that I use, accommodation when I'm college? Are you, always like, just to assure them that this is not going to appear in any way of your academic records or anything. And that's for that. Another thing is accommodation is housing. Like Christy mentioned, in the other slide, the word that we use, a lot of them might be new to international students. For me, I came from Nigeria. When I was in Nigeria, I didn't know like accommodation as modification. I look at accommodation as residence, living in a house, dorm or something. Not until when I go here, people talk about accommodation. Why accommodation? Am I not speaking English? Things like that. It's the same English, but the word that we use is kind of different. Maybe I'm kind of British type, English. That's why, when we meet with international students, like Christine mentioned, we should look out for all these words and the meanings to international students. Next slide, please. Okay. These, managing expectations for international students. When we meet with international students, we should clarify the difference between academic and non-academic accommodations. Here in the US, we only accommodate, academic, we provide academic accommodations. We also provide some auxiliary aids, to students. But, anything that has to be personal, like having someone to go to class with you, someone who might, need to transfer you from wheelchair, we, should explain to them, like accommodations do not cover this, because a lot of this comes with a lot of cost. We want to, enlighten them. These are the things that accommodation cover, and, what is academic, what is not academic, so that they can prepare themselves. And also support students to develop independent living skills. This, I'm going to share my own experience. When I came to the US, there are a lot of things that I relearned. In other countries, people depend on each other. You don't depend a lot. Maybe I'm talking about 12, 11 years ago. I believe it's still the same a little bit today. People will just, let's say you are going out, you need direction, you just call people, "Oh, can you point this to me?" Here in the US, everybody depends on technology. Look up your phone. There was a day when I came, like a week after I landed here, I was out to my class. I was living in the dorm and I get lost. Everything looked the same. I would go to people. Can you, where is the, a lot of people don't even, they were like, "Oh, what is this saying?" And my phone was dead. I couldn't call, I couldn't do anything. I stayed out for like maybe 30 minutes in the snow before I could figure out where I was going. Those things, we should let international students, technology is very important. Also too, weather, climate. If you come from someone who have never seen snow before, coming to the US, you know how to dress. When I came, it took me some time to know you got to dress. Overdress is better than just underdress, because things change quickly. All these little things can go a long way in helping international students. Another thing is support deaf students to learn ASL, some deaf students who might come from from other country, they might not know how to do sign language. Some of them might know, but it might be a little bit different from how sign language is done in the US. We should also support them in making sure that they learn this. And we should also learn about interplay between cultures and disability. This is very important. Like I mentioned earlier, that disability in a lot of countries, they look at it as stigma. Even though you might have the physical disability, they could see you. People don't talk about it often. Not until when I got here, I see people freely discuss, "Oh, my son has ADHD, my daughter has depression." No, people don't talk about that, because if you talk about it, they'll label you, "Oh, this is the disabled family." People don't want to associate themselves with disability. And this can also lead to why some international students might not want to seek help. They might know that they need something, but, because they come from cultures that they look at disability as a stigma. I've worked with a lot of international students. Sometimes they will feel free to share with me because they know I was an international student myself. They might share, but, to their American, classmates, they might not want to share that with them. Another point I would like to make is understand different educational systems. Here in the US, we are more of a hands-on, educational system, where compared to a lot of countries, I know Nigeria that I came from, I've worked with a student from Argentina, I've worked with students from China. They talk a lot about how most of the courses that we do here is assignment-based, project-based, which in other countries is rote learning. They just go for like 2-hour exam. Everything you know, you just do it in one sitting. I consider myself as a very good test. I mean, I know how to take tests. Give me test, I'll do it in 1 hour, because that's how I was trained. In the university, you might only have maybe one assignment in the whole semester. You just wait for the day of exam, go for the exam 2 or 3 hours, you're done, you finish it. When I came, I struggled a little bit because everything is breakdown. Like this assignment is 5%, this is 10, 5, 5. There's no way you can just sit in one sitting and finish the class. All these things, international student might get, and if we couple this with someone who has a disability, that might be very challenging. They are, rote-based learning, that's how they were taught. Now they had to combine that with, hands-on project assignment. That might also create some challenges for them. Next slide, I think.
Yeah, so I am going to talk a little bit about housing and transportation. So many students who I have worked with who are international students, they are looking to live on campus. One thing that is important if you don't work with your housing department is definitely start working with your housing department to make sure that you understand what is available for students throughout the year. Many students are also going to be coming in and traveling with family if they are maybe a PhD student, a master's student, professional student. They're going to be traveling to the United States with their family. And we have very limited family housing on our campus, and it's normally full. And so how are we working with those students to make sure they are receiving their accommodations that also supports their family? Another part of that is if somebody else in the family has a disability and they need to be accommodated for, working to make sure you know the process for what that is. So here at the institution, our institution, any visitors or family who are needing accommodations would go to the Office of Accessibility and ADA. That's the office who works with our people who are not students, and that includes people living within housing. So being able to support not only the student, the international student, but also making sure you have resources for their family as well. But also, with housing being full a lot, you may have to provide off-campus housing suggestions. And this can be challenging, which we're actually going to talk about in our case study on the next slide. But it can be challenging because there are times where these students will not be able to visit a location before they come to the United States, before they need to sign a lease if they are deciding to live off campus. And accessibility is very important for that student. They might not be able to look at it. So how are we making sure we have support for them? Our institution has an off-campus housing coordinator who I refer to often for students who are looking to live off campus, but especially for those international students who are coming in and have concerns about the accessibility of a location. That off-campus housing coordinator is a great person for them to talk to have a resource from campus to support them in finding a location off campus. Finally, on this slide is going to be sharing public transportation options, including paratransit and rideshare. Every city in the United States is going to be different. I know, Sheriff, I did not put it on here, but there's a great website that he shared with us when we were preparing for this that Denver has, I think it's Denver has a program for rideshare. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, Denver has, through RTD, and RTD is a regional transportation district that cover, everywhere in Colorado. They have a program called Access on Demand, whereby people with disabilities can get up to like $25 voucher to take Uber, Lyft, and they get 60 vouchers per month. And, it's not income based. No matter how much you make, anyone, as long as you have like medical documentation that says you have a disability, permanent disability, you can get that, and they just load that to your phone every month. That has transformed a lot of people with disabilities' lives here in Colorado. I've met with people who are blind, who didn't look out for job before. Now with that program, they are independent. They can go to work. They just schedule their Uber to pick them up. I think it's a very transforming, thing that we do here in Colorado.
Yeah, thank
Suresh, is
you.
that connected in some way with paratransit, or is it completely separate?
Yes, it's connected with transit because they also have like these accessible bus shuttles that can pick up if you use wheelchair, because sometimes all this Uber might not have like a accessible vehicle to pick up people, but you have option to schedule the one that is paratransit that you can schedule that can load your wheelchair or scooter or anything. Yeah.
Thank you. And so along with that, from my knowledge, Columbia, Missouri does not have that option. Our public transportation is not the best. And so that is different for students who maybe be coming from a country or city who focus and only take public transportation. And so what they may or may not have here for paratransit or public transportation in general is going to be important. I know that our international center does cover that, and I have worked with them to look into paratransits for people who are off campus to get to campus. It just really depends on the student. All right, our first case study. Now, we're going to ask you guys to answer some questions in the chat at the end, but I'm going to go ahead and read the case study. This is for housing support. So Jane, an incoming PhD student from Russia, utilizes a wheelchair and requires accessible housing. She plans to live on campus with her partner, so there is family in this as well. However, upon contacting Residential Life, Jane learns that apartments are currently full and she has been placed on a wait list with no guarantee of when or if a suit will become available. This situation presents several challenges for Jane. She needs to secure her housing arrangements promptly, but is uncertain about the wait list. Additionally, because she arrives in the United States shortly before the semester begins, she cannot personally visit and assess the accessibility of potential housing options. Jane has contacted the Disability Resource Office to explore what assistance we may be able to provide her in securing accessible housing. So, put your thoughts in the chat. What steps do you believe you as a Disability Resource Center staff member should or could take to assist Jane in her housing search?
Do we have time for someone to read out if there's any chats?
There are not currently any
Okay.
chats. Give it a few more moments. Okay, we have Kate Meyer who said later on, I would offer to zoom in with the student so they could see the space via computer. Yep. It's a good option. Absolutely. And then as for the other question, who do you think you should contact to support Jane outside of your office, outside of the Disability Resource Office? Jill McClintock said, first determine accessibility needs, shower, grab bars, etc., etc. Rachel Conrad said if the town city has any city departments that focus on accessibility of private public spaces, that could be a good place. Either contact yourself or refer the student to discuss accessibility housing. Yes, Rachel, that's good as well. Susan Tripp said contact the off-campus housing office and ask if they have someone who could preview housing options. Yes. Um, Kate Meyer said working with residential life or community apartment options. Susan Tripp said international welcome buddy can take pictures of available housing. Yes. So those are all really similar to what actually happened in this situation. So this was a student that had come through a while ago, and I provided the student with the accommodations that they would be provided if they were to live on campus. So kind of what Jill was saying, we went through that interactive process of accessibility needs to discuss those showers, grab bars, door widths, all of those things. And then I confirmed with housing the information that if it was correct that there was a wait list, how long was the wait list, and gathered some more of that information. Just like I think it was Susan, yes, contacting that off-campus housing office to provide that connection with the coordinator to see what was available and have them talk directly to Jane to discuss those options. Finally, one thing that was done as well was I asked my colleagues for their initial suggestions as to locations on or around the campus that maybe was a little bit more personalized so that Jane could start looking at housing while getting in contact with the off-campus housing office. So yeah, you guys, that was great. Go into documentation. Sheriff, do you want to talk or do you want me to?
I can talk. Yeah. Yeah, when like we are member of AHEAD, we know the importance of documentation in what we do. And I know each institution, approach this on a different, level or basis. And documentation is very important in deciding accommodation. Sometimes this could be a barrier for international students. We want to identify low or no cost community resources for students to be evaluated. When we were preparing these slides, I shared my experience working with students, US students, not international students, who had diagnosis for looking for diagnosis for learning disability, and the student didn't tell his parents. He went ahead to get evaluated for learning disability, and they charged the dad $5,000. Dad was like, oh, this, you should have told me before you did this. If you think about $5,000 to a US student compared to someone who is coming from different country, that $5,000 might be million something in their home currency. That might be a challenge. That's why it's very important where we work with international students. What we have, in my current job, what I do is everything is not based on documentation. I look at, students sharing their history, information, their challenges with me. I look at that as primary source of information when I'm deciding accommodation. What I'm saying is we shouldn't focus just only on documentation, because that could be a barrier for a lot of students, including international students. And also to work with students on obtaining documentation from home. I know this might be something that we can explore, because students, if they did their research, they might know that, yeah, I might need this documentation when I get to the US. Sometimes there might be problem. Someone who is diagnosing that in other country might not be someone who can diagnose such condition here in the US. But as a disability office, we shouldn't let our focus be on documentation alone. We should also consider other, information students share with us. Like that's reduce reliance on medical documentation. And also too, in my college, we do provide provisional academic support while students is still looking for their documentation. We call it provisional accommodation. It usually lasts within 1 semester or 6 months for students to find ways. And even if we think they are still struggling to get documentation, we have some referral list that we do refer students to that they can go to get documentation for their, accommodation that they are seeking for. The whole point of this, section will be do not rely solely on documentation because that could create some barrier for international students. If there's anything you want to add, Christine?
I don't think so. I think you covered it all. So we will go on. Oh, that looks funny. We will go on. Do you want to read this?
Yeah, I can read this. This is a case study about academic documentation. Marcos, a student from Latin America, has come to the Disability Resource Center seeking information about academic accommodations. During his meeting, Marcos shared that he has been experiencing significant academic difficulties which are impacting his performance across multiple courses. He reports spending a considerable amount of time studying, but his grades do not reflect his efforts. In a recent meeting with his professor, Marcus was advised that his struggles suggest he may have a learning disability. This was the first time Marcus had received such feedback, and he reports feeling confused and unsure about how to proceed. He has never been formally diagnosed with a learning disability and is unfamiliar with the process of seeking an assessment or obtaining accommodation. If you had a student who came to you, share this with you, what additional questions should you ask Marcus? I'm just referring to the audience, what additional questions should you ask Marcus? And how will you support Marcus as a DRC member? And what resources do you have on campus to support? If you can just put it in chat, either of these questions.
While people are typing their answers, one thing I was going to mention is actually something that Sheriff had mentioned a few slides ago of reminding them that this does not go on their transcripts here in the United States. This is something that is private, and letting students know that up front can help with their decision as to where they would like to go with their with the feedback they were provided. But I think that's important, and it was already mentioned as a misconception, but definitely important in this situation.
And Rachel put in the chat, I will go through the usual process of the meeting, gathering information, identifying barriers, what are they, the cause, if they have any idea. Without a diagnosis, we could not establish accommodation. We recommend Marcus to visit our student health center, which could then further refer him to evaluation or diagnosis services. She also said, also asking specifically what is having difficulty with, like content, language, teaching style. Yeah, I think those are great suggestions how to proceed. And G wrote, has he struggled with academic in his home country? Yeah. Is there any history of this type of challenges? What is the thing that is new? And, because all these questions will lead us to be able to support him in an effective way.
This is Justin. Part of this question came from an experience of one of our previous managers who, when she used to work in higher education, she encountered a student who had done just fine in their home country, but then their learning disability started to manifest itself once they were learning English, which was their second language, and then having to navigate advanced academic curriculum in that foreign language, then some of the compensatory techniques they had developed to manage in Arabic suddenly were not working as well in English.
Also, too, before I talk about this slide, one thing that we do not talk a lot about is the language barrier. Not language barrier. If you come from other countries, the possibility is there that English might not be your first language. You might have like an accent that could create some barrier for you. And that sometimes, I've seen some international students who would not even want to speak up in class. I experienced the same when I came because people struggle to understand me. I have a very strong accent, which could be a challenge, in self-esteem, but it's something that we should also look out for when working with international students because they may have accent, they don't want to speak up and things like that. That's something we should also think about. Talking about reduced course load, F1 student requirements change periodically. This has to do with immigration. When we are dealing with immigration in the US is always in flux. Different administration have different interpretations of the law. The law is always vague. What is applicable in this administration might not be applicable in other administration. All these, requirements that international students need to meet might create a challenge for them. If we combine that with academic rigor of the US, we should also look into that. And when we are working with the international students as a disability office, we should always refer them to their international student support services office because we don't want to advise them on something and find out later that this has a significant implication on their stay in the US. That's why it's always, when we are working with international students, we should also be liaising with International Student Support Services Office. Like Christy mentioned in the beginning, presentation, meet at the orientation, because the way we approach for US students might be different from how it's applicable for international students. Another thing, we've seen is a reduced course load, which may only be approved on a temporary basis for illness or initial academic challenges, or if the student needs to take fewer classes in the last term. This is a very big thing, because if you come as international students, you have to be full-time all the time, only except, let's say you are to take 33 or 35 courses, you've taken like a 32, you only have one course left in your program and you can be part-time or take one class at the last semester, which I did experience that in my last semester at Grand Valley State in Michigan. I only took one class because I was graduating. But if you have a disability and you think, oh, this is too much for me, if I combine this with my disability, you can't just say, oh, I'm dropping classes and I want to go part-time. That's not something you want to do. If you want to do that, you should talk with International Student Office to seek guidance, because if you do that, they need to report your CVs. They call it, Student Exchange and Visitor Information System, whereby they keep international student record with, US immigration. Once you drop below full-time, they'll report you. That could have like a significant implication on your stay in the US. That's why, a lot of disabilities office, when we work with international students, we should be very mindful of that. If something we are not clear about, we should work with the international student office to provide guidance, and also to encourage students to seek academic support. I know it could be challenging. Some students might not want to seek support. It could be based on their culture, their beliefs. Some culture believe, people who are seeking support on the basis of disability are weak, all sorts of misconceptions. We should encourage them. Like I mentioned in the beginning, like Christy mentioned, we should also, assure them that this will not go on their record. It won't show on your transcript, so that they can seek academic support. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to read this. This is for full-time students. Sam is an F1 international student with a disability who is experiencing difficulty managing the academic workload. As an F1 visa holder, Sam is required to maintain full-time student status, which translates to a specific minimum number of credit hours per semester at the university. And question to audience, what steps do you take to support Sam? And what resources does your university have to support Sam? I think we talk about that.
Curious if there are any institutions here, anyone else besides the presenters who found that academic support services have been able to support students to develop those time management skills. I know I was recently taking classes and I was working as a tutor in an accounting program, and they were talking about how a lot of students come with difficulties learning how to manage their time, and that sometimes academic support services, they don't modify a curriculum or anything, but they work with you on developing some of those time management skills.
Susan's put in the chat, if you can get a letter from a medical doctor or licensed clinical psychologist, we can approve reduced course load for up to 1 year. Yeah, I think that's what I found myself in my search. Thank you, Susan. Any other comments? I think, like I said, anything that we are not clear, based on what Susan said, that's my own thought too, because, this is the rules I followed when I was international student. You had to have it's not just about documentation. It has to come from someone who is licensed to treat or diagnose such a condition, which is a little bit might be difficult because I'm always flexible when I'm dealing with documentation, but there's no flexibility when it comes to immigration. You have to be, follow the rules and regulations that they lay down. That's why it's very important to work with International Student Office. Rachel, Susan also mentioned, I wish it could be approved for more than a year, but it is what it is. It can only be approved for 1 year. And Rachel mentioned, identify if there are academic barriers potentially mitigated by accommodations. For management, recommended to tutoring. We have a learning center with academic coaching that focuses on academic skills for students. If a reduced cost load is appropriate as an accommodation, the accommodation could be established. Refer him to International Center and Financial Aid to discuss if there are impacts on their status. If there is, explore additional on-campus support. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. We work in collaboration with other offices. Sometimes you don't know something exists until you ask or you work with them. That's why when we are working with international students or dealing with immigration, you don't want to say, oh, I know everything because I have personal experience. Things might have changed the last time you did it. That's why it's very important to be careful when advising international students. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Okay, is this for me or Christy?
I think it's me.
This is for Justin. Yep.
Yeah, I get to take up. So these are just a list of some examples of community organizations. So we did mention earlier, and I don't know, I don't think it made it on this slide, but paratransit and services derived from paratransit for students looking to solve their transportation issues. Pretty much all communities in the United States that have any sort of a public transit system, they are required to also invest in some level of a paratransit system. And in most communities, paratransit looks like a giant, kind of like that typical squat mid-sized van that you see that has a wheelchair lift, and it transports all people with all types of disabilities, including internationals. And like Sheriff mentioned earlier, in some communities, they are experimenting with other types of transportation since not everybody necessarily needs an accessible van. Not everybody uses a power chair, for example, or a manual wheelchair. So sometimes a person who has transportation difficulties might be fine just hopping in a taxi cab and giving a voucher. That can be a great community organization that's not necessarily on this slide. Also, some of these other examples, Department of Vocational Rehabilitation provides employment support services to individuals with disabilities. I was really surprised when I encountered someone from vocational rehabilitation in Colorado who did mention that international students could potentially access certain types of support services through their department. And sometimes in some states, you have to have proof of citizenship, so it may vary, but we have heard of sometimes VR or vocational rehabilitation has been able to provide support for students like training on skills or things like that. Even maybe potentially funding, but I wouldn't count on that as much. Community organizations can also be a good source of, like, if a student needs funding for a laptop, for example, community organizations like Lions Clubs or Sir Optimist or Kiwanis can be good options. There are also disabled people's organizations. Centers for Independent Living are part of a large network of nonprofits that provide community disability services in a lot of places in the United States. Results may vary, but sometimes they do focus on young adults and support for students. You can access information about the National Independent Living Movement at the National Council on Independent Living, or NCIL, pronounced nickel, website. And each state, usually if you search Centers for Independent Living, insert state name, you can sometimes find local resources, and they usually identify themselves on their websites by saying we are directed and led by people with disabilities. Sometimes they might say 50% of our staff or more are people with disabilities. Those are all kinds of signs that you've encountered a center for independent living that is based off of the independent living philosophy. And many states, sometimes blind or low vision students come and they need extra skills, extra orientation and mobility, or sometimes it's the student's first time living on their own and they've just not had as many opportunities as other students to develop some of those skills like preparing food and doing laundry. And so sometimes these centers for blind and low vision individuals can offer training services. There was a student some years ago who went to a college in Georgia, and they went to, I think it was the Vista Center for the Blind or something like that in Georgia. And they can sometimes also offer funding for assistive technology. And I would say training centers and also centers for independent living, also student unions can offer some of that mentorship and one-on-one guidance for international students. And with that, we are happy to take your questions.
Justin, this is Ashley. There is a question in the chat from Salish. Thank you for the information. Well, initially, Salish had asked, are there specific scholarships, grants, or support programs that students with disabilities can apply for before or after enrollment, which can have an impact on international students? And then followed it up with another question about, can you share details about any disability-based scholarships for international students?
And I can talk about that. I do in my office, we do have a list of scholarships that international, that are disability based. A lot of them I have like a citizenship requirement, but some of them don't, which, I can share that. I think I can look for it. If you share your email, I can send that to you, and I can send that to Justin too. We have some list of disability-based scholarships that, any institution can share with their students. one thing students can also look for is they can connect with their embassies. Sometimes all these embassies, they may have some funding to support students who came from their country, because coming to the US to study is a huge financial cost. Sometimes that alone could be something that create barrier. If you combine that with having a disability, that's might be a very great challenge for them. That's why when I did my own, I know I struggle a lot in terms of funding. Sometimes you might get like $500, $1,000. It's still something that you can use to pay because you don't qualify for financial aid. Everything has to be out of pocket. Medical, everything has to be out of pocket. That's why it's very important if you can research funding. But thank you for sharing your email, Solish, and I will send that to you. Probably tomorrow. I'll send the list to you. Yeah.
Thanks, Sheriff.
Mhm.
And I can add, I mean, Sheriff mentioned applying through embassies. The Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs offers some different fellowships and funding opportunities. Potentially, Education USA might be a resource in your country. And also, there are sometimes private foundations as well, like Rotary, for example, has peace fellowships where they offer funding for master's degrees. So we can definitely also send out information in addition to what Sheriff shared. They're not always disability specific scholarships, but they are definitely scholarships that welcome applicants with disabilities. I have a question. If nobody else does, I'm curious. So I know that students can go part-time if they're having temporary academic difficulties. And that was one of those things that when we were talking about F1 visas and those requirements. But has anybody ever, historically, this has not been the case, right? And has anyone ever provided temporary accommodations to English learners? This is a question that sometimes we do get, and I'm curious about that, where the field is at on that, or if our presenters want to weigh in.
I think for me, okay. Susan mentioned something in the chat. Susan said, I think it is allowed only in the first term. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I thought as well. I've
me
never
too.
worked directly with international students providing, this or, English language learner, but I believe, if we have like a designated student official, or that's what they call them, DSO, that works with international students, I believe they will have done that. But because each time I meet with international students, I always refer them to go to the international student office because I know how, you know, a lot of regulations and things, requirement that they need to meet. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Kristen. I was going to say the same thing. I would refer that student to the International Center, to their advisor, to discuss that because I don't want to mess anything up, and um, could work with them if they wanted more information. And it looks like Tabitha said, I am a DSO, which is a designated school official. Yes, academic difficulties only apply in the first semester/term.
Mhm. Yes. Another thing too that I would comment on with from a conversation with a deaf student several years ago is that sometimes when you're learning ASL, you benefit from having dual accommodations, both captions and interpreter services. And it's normal for universities to ask students to choose one or the other accommodation, but possibly something to be thinking about when you guys are working with deaf students who are looking to learn sign language is trying to see if there's a way that dual accommodations, at least in the student's first term, can be made available. And this student that I spoke to several years ago figured out a workaround and something too that actually you could do, where she would look for a class where there was a section where there was another deaf student enrolled, and then she would ask for the accommodation that the other student had not requested. So if the other student asked for interpreters, this international student would ask for captions. And that way she would have both services. So she could see the English, which she already knew, and then see the interpretation and learn ASL that way. Well, everyone, it looks like we have come to the end of the hour. So I want to say thank you to our presenters, to Kristen Mossman and Sharif Rashid, and Ashley, my associate, for driving the waiting room in the background and helping to just keep things generally on track. I really enjoyed presenting with all of you, and this was a great presentation. And thanks to the audience for your feedback and participation, and to Joanna for doing the captions. Please stay tuned because on June 5th, we're going to be presenting a webinar featuring some of the folks who were featured in our A World Awaits You or Away journal, which we published last year. The focus was on individuals with non-apparent disabilities studying abroad. So we are going to have some of the individuals who were in that magazine sharing about their experiences. And so I hope that you will consider joining us for that. And then on June 12th, we mentioned earlier about the importance of making sure that your materials are accessible for people using screen readers, for people who need captions, for people who need plain language and so forth. And a big part of that is making sure that you not only have the technical skills on your staff to be able to make accessible documents and then to test that documents are accessible, but also that you're making sure that you have the procedures in the background and the training processes and kind of all of that soft social kind of human resources stuff happening in the background to ensure that even as staff are coming and going, even as new people are being onboarded, that accessibility procedures are continuing to be observed. And so on June 12th, we're going to be talking about how to set up a digital accessibility policy and how to implement that in your organization. So keep an eye out for those. And also, we will be following up with a survey. So please fill that out and expect in the next couple weeks to see a recording with access to the slides. So thank you to all, and we hope to see you in our next webinar later on June 5th. So everyone have a great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.